Good morning, everyone. Let's get right into it. Why do we do what we do? Because we must. Because stagnation is not an option. Because the future is not something we inherit. It's something we build. We don't pursue comfort. We pursue outcomes. At every step, we ask ourselves, what problem is worth solving? What system is broken that needs fixing? What future needs designing? When you approach life from first principles, you eliminate noise. You forget what's popular or what's trending. You drill down to the physics, the raw truth, and you build up from there. It's slower, it's harder, but it's the only way to innovate. The work that really matters isn't glamorous. It's often met with resistance. It involves long nights, failure, rebuilding, and 1,000 reasons to give up. But if the goal is big enough, if the outcome matters enough, you don't stop, you iterate. You keep going. That's why we do what we do. We're not motivated by applause. We're not in it for titles or trophies. We act to move the needle, to expand possibility, to make life better, smarter, safer, more sustainable for everyone. Every breakthrough in human history was born from unreasonable conviction, from someone asking, why not? When the world said, you can't. That same mindset must guide us now, because the challenges we face today are bigger than ever, and they require solutions that don't yet exist. But that's the opportunity. We do what we do to push the edge of what's possible. We do it because we believe the future should be exciting, not feared, and we do it knowing full well the odds may be against us, because that has never been a good enough reason to stand still. Thank you. In the real world, comfort is often a trap. It seduces individuals, teams, and even entire organizations into believing that stability equals success. But the truth is, nothing extraordinary has ever been built from a place of ease. The reason we push forward, the reason we endure failure, long hours, pressure, and uncertainty, is not because it's enjoyable in the moment. It's because there's a purpose that outweighs the pain. Purpose becomes the compass, not comfort. Comfort tends to favor repetition. It prefers what is known, predictable, and safe. Purpose, on the other hand, demands change. It forces us to abandon what is familiar and move toward what is necessary. This is true whether you're designing a product, building a company, or solving a global crisis. If your motivation is rooted in comfort, you'll always choose the easier route, the less disruptive path. But if you're driven by purpose, you'll make decisions based on long-term impact, regardless of how difficult or unpopular they are. Comfort is reactive. It waits for conditions to be perfect before it acts. It defers, delays, and negotiates with fear. Purpose is proactive. It moves forward even when the outcome is uncertain. When people act out of comfort, they avoid friction. They shy away from radical ideas. They seek consensus before clarity. But when purpose takes over, the priority shifts from being accepted to being effective. Every revolutionary leap, whether in science, technology, or social progress, was propelled by individuals who rejected comfort in favor of something more meaningful. They didn't just take risks for the thrill. They took risks because not doing so would have meant betraying the mission. Working 80 to 100 hours a week isn't rational by traditional standards. Neither is investing in ideas that have a high chance of failure. But when the purpose is clear, when you know exactly why you're doing what you're doing, it justifies the cost, not temporarily but consistently over years or decades. In this context, purpose becomes a kind of energy source. It's the fuel that drives execution when motivation runs dry. Purpose doesn't need permission from the environment. It doesn't wait for validation. It operates from conviction, not convenience. People who lead with purpose don't ask, is this easy? They ask, is this right? And that question often leads them into spaces of discomfort, financial risk, public skepticism, emotional strain, operational chaos. But that's precisely where innovation happens. Purpose redefines success. It shifts it from short-term metrics to long-term legacy. When your guiding force is comfort, success is measured by how little you have to change. When your guiding force is purpose, success is measured by how much progress you're making, even if that progress requires total reinvention. For engineers, this means discarding an entire design iteration even after spending months on it. For founders, it means pivoting a business model that once worked but no longer aligns with the mission. These are not comfortable decisions. They are decisions aligned with purpose. On a team level, purpose is the unifying force that transcends personal ambition. It's what transforms individuals into collaborators, because everyone is rallying around the same outcome, not just a paycheck or job title, but a shared commitment to solve something that actually matters. That's what gets people to show up when no one's watching. That's what gets them to persist when incentives disappear. Comfort can't do that. Only purpose can. Purpose is also scalable. Comfort plateaus. Once comfort is achieved, it starts working against growth. It encourages optimization instead of reinvention. It becomes more about defending territory than exploring new ones. But purpose keeps expanding. The more you achieve, the more you realize how much more there is to do. It doesn't shrink with success, it grows. That's why purpose-driven teams remain resilient even after major wins. They're not addicted to the feeling of winning. They're addicted to the meaning behind the work. Ultimately, if we choose comfort, we choose to maintain the present. If we choose purpose, we commit to building the future. That difference defines whether we merely survive or whether we lead. Most people reason by analogy. They look at how things have always been done, compare, copy, and make incremental adjustments. It's faster, easier, and socially reinforced. But it's also the reason why so many systems are broken, why innovation stalls, and why solutions often feel like repetitions of old mistakes. First principles thinking, by contrast, cuts deeper. It strips away assumption, convention, and tradition until only the fundamental truths remain. Then, from those truths, new solutions are built, ground up, clean, and often revolutionary. First principles thinking begins with a deceptively simple question: what do we know for sure? Not what we assume, not what we inherited, not what others say should work. Just what is objectively true, down to the physics, the math, the core constraints of reality. In engineering, that means understanding the raw materials, the laws of energy, the cost curves. In business, it means questioning the market norms, the pricing models, the behavior of users at a foundational level. In leadership, it means defining what people actually need to thrive, not what the organizational chart suggests. This method of thinking is slower and more cognitively demanding than copying best practices. It requires intellectual honesty. You have to be willing to admit that what you've believed or built might be wrong, but that's exactly why it produces uncommon results. While most people are busy iterating within a broken framework, those using first principles thinking are busy redesigning the framework itself. It's not just about thinking differently, it's about thinking better, more accurately, more originally, and more sustainably. The power of first principles is that it's universally applicable. It doesn't belong to any one field or domain. It can be applied to product design, organizational structure, public policy, personal habit, anything. The moment you ask, what are the fundamental truths here? you begin to break free from inherited constraints. For example, if you were designing a transportation system from scratch, and you didn't assume that roads, gasoline, or even drivers had to be part of the equation, entirely new possibilities emerge. That's how electric vehicles, autonomous navigation, and vertical takeoff became not just feasible, but necessary. In practice, first principles thinking feels uncomfortable. It isolates you from consensus. It forces you to defend ideas that may have no precedent. It's easier to say, "That's how it's always been done," than to say, "What if we did it differently because the current way makes no sense?" But comfort with contradiction is a feature of real progress. First principles thinkers are not contrarians for the sake of rebellion. They are rational skeptics. They understand that innovation is not born from confidence, it's born from curiosity. The challenge, of course, is execution. First principles thinking gives you the blueprint, but it doesn't give you momentum. That must be earned through engineering, iteration, and discipline. Once you've identified the essential truths, you must translate them into form, into prototypes, into systems, into organizations. This is where most people revert back to analogy. They might discover something new, but then package it using the old rules. This defeats the entire purpose. First principles must be carried through to completion, not just ideation. It also has a cultural component. Organizations that embrace first principles don't just reward answers, they reward questions. They build environments where it's safe to challenge the status quo, where the best idea wins, regardless of hierarchy. They create processes that encourage deep thinking rather than shallow replication. In such cultures, failure is expected, not as a result of laziness, but as a byproduct of original thinking. When you're doing something that hasn't been done before, failure is data, not defeat. Over time, teams that adopt this mindset gain a disproportionate advantage. While others are bound by legacy systems, regulatory assumptions, and institutional habits, first principles thinkers are freer, faster, and more adaptable. They're not stuck in "this is how it works." They're operating from "this is what's true." And that's a far more powerful place to build from. They don't wait for change to be safe. They force it to be logical. This approach does not guarantee success, but it guarantees clarity, and in a world full of noise, that clarity becomes a kind of strategic superpower. You stop reacting to what others are doing and start building based on what actually matters. You stop managing perception and start engineering reality. That is the real value of first principles, not in sounding smart, but in solving problems others think are unsolvable. The reason people often avoid big problems isn't because they're lazy. It's because big problems are intimidating. They're complex, uncertain, and slow to reward. They demand more than execution. They demand obsession. But solving big problems is where the real value lies. It's where breakthroughs happen. It's where history is written. The drive to solve big problems is not about ego or ambition. It's about the realization that incremental progress is no longer enough. When systems are broken, environments are collapsing, and technologies are outdated, doing the bare minimum becomes a form of negligence. Big problems are uncomfortable. They expose the limits of current thinking, resources, and systems. They require teams to operate on the edge of what is currently possible. That's why most people default to solving small, manageable problems. Small problems are safe. They have established playbooks. They generate predictable outcomes, but they also generate diminishing returns. The larger the challenge, the greater the impact of solving it. The difficulty is not a deterrent, it is a signal. If the problem is massive and unsolved, it likely means that few have had the courage or clarity to truly take it on. The people who pursue big problems operate with a different mindset. They do not begin by asking what is profitable. They begin by asking what is broken or what could be dramatically better. Whether it's sustainable energy, space exploration, education reform, or AI alignment, the starting point is always dissatisfaction with the status quo. This dissatisfaction is not negative, it's productive. It fuels the energy needed to work on something that may not produce results for years. It allows you to focus when everyone else is distracted. When you're driven by the size of the problem, not the size of the reward, your priorities become sharper. Big problems demand bold solutions. Incrementalism doesn't work when entire systems need to be redesigned. You can't fix global warming by making air conditioners 10% more efficient. You can't fix mass education failures by making standardized tests slightly shorter. Big problems require people who are willing to start from scratch, to challenge the underlying assumptions, and to build what hasn't been built yet. This is where engineering meets philosophy. You must understand how things work technically, but also why they exist morally. Solving a big problem isn't just about changing code or hardware. It's about changing behavior, expectations, and sometimes the entire context. There's a myth that working on big problems is only for geniuses or experts. In reality, it's for anyone willing to think long term, stay patient, and endure repeated failure. The truth is, most big problems don't require revolutionary intelligence. They require relentless determination. The difficulty lies in staying focused while everyone else chases short-term wins. It lies in choosing substance over visibility. You may spend years building something that no one understands, until suddenly they do. That's what it means to lead, to work ahead of recognition, to endure isolation in pursuit of transformation. The systems that surround us today, our internet, satellites, electric cars, vaccine platforms, were once dismissed as science fiction. What brought them into reality was not blind optimism, but focused intention. People believed the problems were worth solving, even when success looked impossible. That belief became action. Action became prototypes. Prototypes became systems. Systems became industries. Every step of the way, the problem remained the North Star. Not the market size, not the hype cycle, not the investor pitch. When you stay true to the problem, you're less likely to drift, pivot for the wrong reasons, or compromise the mission for convenience. Another reason to solve big problems is that they attract big minds. People want to work on things that matter. They want their work to have consequence. When you frame your mission in terms of solving a fundamental human challenge, you attract collaborators who are driven by meaning, not just compensation. This creates a compounding effect. Talent builds traction. Traction builds momentum. Momentum builds resilience. And resilience is exactly what you need when the timelines are long, the obstacles are hard, and the path is unclear. Big problems also force you to think globally. You stop optimizing for a single product or market, and you start designing for civilizations, scale outcomes. This scale of thinking transforms how you allocate time, capital, and effort. You become allergic to shallow thinking. You stop asking what competitors are doing and start asking what humanity needs. That shift, from competition to contribution, is what separates true innovators from opportunists. In the end, solving big problems is not about doing more, it's about doing what matters most. It's not about speed, it's about direction. And it's not about certainty, it's about courage. When you prioritize impact over applause, your motivations shift from external validation to internal necessity. You stop chasing popularity and start pursuing outcomes that actually matter. Applause is fleeting. It's reactive, dependent on others, shaped by perception. Impact is enduring. It's proactive, independent of approval, and grounded in results. The difference is subtle in theory but profound in practice. People who seek applause ask, will people like this? People who seek impact ask, will this solve the problem? Applause is addictive. It rewards fast wins, surface-level achievements, and charismatic delivery. It feeds the ego but rarely fuels innovation. People can get lost in the performance, designing projects, products, or ideas for how they'll be received rather than how they'll perform. They begin curating their decisions for praise, tweaking their purpose to remain liked. But real progress isn't always likable. It's messy, divisive, sometimes painful. The moment you place popularity above purpose, you dilute the power of your work. Impact doesn't always look good in the short term. In fact, it often invites criticism before recognition. Innovators are frequently misunderstood. Disruptive ideas are met with resistance, not because they're wrong, but because they challenge norms that people have grown comfortable with. When your priority is impact, you develop the strength to endure this resistance. You stop needing permission to act. You begin to measure success in terms of what changes, not in terms of what cheers. Focusing on impact requires long-term thinking. It forces you to ask whether your work will matter in 5 years, 10 years, or 50. Applause rewards you for the moment. Impact asks whether that moment led to a meaningful shift. A feature that delights users may trend on social media, but does it actually improve lives? A product launch may generate excitement, but does it deliver sustained value? The applause may come fast, but the real question is whether the effects last. People who build for impact develop a different tolerance for adversity. They are more willing to be doubted, more prepared to fail, and more focused on iteration than impression. They expect to be wrong sometimes. They understand that mistakes are part of the path to insight. When you're optimizing for applause, failure becomes something to avoid at all costs. When you're optimizing for impact, failure becomes data, a tool for refinement, not a mark of shame. There's also a structural difference in how you organize teams around these two values. A team built to chase applause is often focused on presentation, branding, optics, messaging, visibility. While those things can matter, they are hollow without substance. A team built to create impact is centered on effectiveness, problem solving, execution, iteration, and user outcomes. They don't move quickly just to appear agile. They move intelligently to refine and scale what works. They aren't trying to look successful. They're trying to be useful. Courage is essential when prioritizing impact. You will have to say no to trends. You will have to endure being overlooked while others gain temporary attention. You may have to make decisions that seem irrational to those on the outside. But if your metric is impact, not applause, these decisions become necessary. They align with mission, not optics. You can delay gratification because the goal isn't to be admired, it's to be effective. There's also a moral component. Applause is about you, impact is about others. When you make decisions based on impact, you put people first. You think about what will help, heal, empower, or improve. It shifts the center of gravity away from ego and toward service. This is especially important in leadership. A leader chasing applause becomes reactive, image-conscious, driven by polls and praise. A leader focused on impact becomes principled, consistent, and focused on delivering outcomes, even if they're unpopular in the short run. Building for impact also means accepting that your work may go unnoticed at first, or even throughout your lifetime. Many of the most influential ideas and inventions weren't celebrated immediately. They were misunderstood, dismissed, or ignored, but they endured because their foundation was not built on applause. It was built on necessity. And eventually, necessity becomes undeniable. In a world driven by likes, follows, and virality, choosing impact over applause is radical. It's a commitment to depth over display, to solving hard problems instead of creating easy distractions. It demands resilience, humility, and a high tolerance for solitude, but it is also the path to real change, because applause echoes and fades, but impact, when done right, continues long after the noise has gone. Failure is often treated as the opposite of success, when in reality, it's the foundation of progress. The act of failing is not a flaw in the process. It is the process. Every system, product, or mission that has ever pushed boundaries has been built on a series of failed attempts. These are not setbacks to avoid, they are data points to study, pressure tests to learn from, and stepping stones toward better solutions. If you fear failure, you fear learning, and if you fear learning, you eliminate your chance of building anything truly meaningful. Iteration is the language of innovation. You don't launch perfection, you launch version 1. Then you analyze what breaks, what lags, what confuses, what doesn't scale. Every problem you uncover is a gift. It's information that tells you what needs to be reworked, refined, or completely redesigned. Failure in this context is not destruction, it's construction. It tells you, with specificity, where reality doesn't match the hypothesis. It reveals where the theory needs correction or where the execution needs reinforcement. The most dangerous mindset is not failure, it's complacency disguised as success. When people avoid failure at all costs, they create stagnation. They become afraid to try bold things, they settle into mediocrity, they start optimizing existing solutions rather than exploring new ones. This is why so many industries become paralyzed, not because their people aren't smart, but because they're too afraid to risk failure in the pursuit of something better. But when failure is embraced as iteration, everything changes. Risk becomes part of the rhythm, experimentation becomes the norm, progress happens when you build, break, learn, and repeat. This is true in hardware development, software engineering, company building, and even personal growth. It's not about being reckless. It's about being resilient. You design experiments intelligently, knowing that some will fail, and that the lessons from those failures will fuel the next iteration. You stop asking whether something will fail and start asking what you'll learn when it does. This shift unlocks creativity. It removes fear from the equation and replaces it with focus. Culturally, this requires leadership. Teams only embrace failure when they see leaders doing it first, owning mistakes, sharing postmortems, being transparent about what didn't work and why. This builds psychological safety. It gives people permission to try things that might not succeed immediately. It also aligns everyone toward learning and long-term thinking. A team that fears failure becomes slow, bureaucratic, and defensive. A team that embraces iteration becomes fast, agile, and mission-driven. This mindset also changes how you measure success. Instead of tracking only wins, you start tracking velocity of iteration. How quickly are you learning? How fast are you cycling through versions? How many assumptions are you testing per month? These metrics are far more predictive of long-term impact than short-term revenue spikes or user growth, because in the early stages of anything important, Failure is not noise, it is signal. And if you ignore it, you build on illusions. Even more importantly, failure creates internal toughness. When you fail repeatedly and still show up, you develop grit. You stop expecting the path to be easy. You stop being surprised by resistance. You build emotional stamina. This mental resilience is what allows you to outlast competitors, critics, and fatigue. It's what allows you to keep going when the timeline stretches from months to years, and when the payoff is nowhere in sight. The willingness to endure failure becomes your edge. Failure also creates humility. It reminds you that you are not infallible, that intelligence is not immunity, that no matter how advanced your models or how sophisticated your strategies, the real world is still unpredictable. This humility keeps you grounded. It makes you more likely to listen to feedback, test your ideas rigorously, and stay open to change. Arrogance protects the ego. Humility protects the mission. Iteration is also how you scale responsibly. A solution that works in theory or in a controlled environment often breaks when exposed to the complexities of real-world use. You don't discover that in the lab, you discover it through failure in the field. And once you do, you redesign, you adapt, you don't throw away the vision, you refine the execution. This is how durable systems are built, not through perfectionism, but through persistence. In every domain where excellence matters, from rockets to robotics, software to sustainability, the people who win are not those who never fail. They are the ones who fail the smartest, iterate the fastest, and stay the longest. Because to fail is not to fall behind, it is to move forward one imperfect step at a time.